John, welcome.
Thanks
to
for
another.
having me.
Yeah,
It's awesome to be here.
awesome. Welcome to another episode of the Intentional Health for Women podcast. Today, I'm joined by a friend and colleague in the gym. We've seen each other around the health and wellness space, gyms locally here in Scottsdale, Arizona, for probably the last 2 or 3 years, give or take. Also got a chance to see you at a handful of conferences, out and about. And, as we've gotten to know each other more, gotten to consume some of your content, see, have conversations about, where you're traveling to this week or this month and what have you for conferences. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, what was kind of your background? Cause like you come from a little bit more of like a traditional background than I do.
Sure.
And you even taught in that background for a long time.
Yeah. I mean, people say Dr. Mike, but like I said, if you can call me John, it's not super formal, but I'm Dr. J. Mike. I spent over 20 years helping both general pop and of course athletes figure out what works and get people stronger, more powerful and break through training plateaus. I taught at the academic level for about 10 years, taught maybe 65, 70 courses, undergrad and graduate level courses, strength training and performance nutrition. I've spoken over 120 talks in the industry over the last 11 years, published over 12 book chapters, been published, written or interviewed for dozens and dozens of fitness magazines and, strength outlets in the country. And then, traveled the last several years speaking domestically and of course, picking up the international scene as we speak. We're getting ready to launch some really cool things here shortly. So posting a lot of content on all platforms now, but still training hard and still going. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So what is on the cusp? Like, what do you guys kind of got coming down the pipeline? What have you been working on?
We've been working on getting ready to launch an online course and got a webinar coming up about it coming up here really, really soon.
Okay.
And launching an online course. And then early next year, we have plans to move that to an in-person course, full weekend for continuing education approval. So you'll find more about that, coming up as we get ready to launch some stuff. So get them on the email list and find out like what's in store for some cool things. So I'm actually going to going to the Arnold, or the Olympia.
Yeah.
I'm on a couple panels for Olympia Education Summit in Vegas. I think you're going to that, aren't you? Yeah, it's awesome. And then a couple of weeks, I'm actually heading to South Korea. Wow. So to speak at an event. So excited about that. I always get a little bit nervous, obviously traveling long distance, but the flight won't be as long. It's about maybe 10 hours.
Oh, it's not too bad.
Last year when we went to Singapore and Bangkok, Thailand, took a direct flight from San Francisco to Singapore, and that was 16 hours. So yeah, that's actually, if you look up, that's consistently ranked as one of the longest flights in the world. And I've done it twice. So coming back is 14. So, and that's also direct. So yeah, it's, you definitely have to plan a little bit, take food and your protein and all that stuff, and they feed you, but definitely got to get a bigger seat. So.
Right. So I'm sure as you're aware, we've spoken a little bit about this podcast. What's the demographic that I'm here to serve? It's, the Intentional Health for Women podcast. Given your background and, seeing your content, like you've worked with plenty of females yourself. Mm-hmm. From your perspective and given your background, why is strength training starting there? Strength and power training, et cetera, so important for women?
Yeah, I think before I answer that, I think it's important to provide your audience some like numbers and statistics and this could be risk factors. And this is across the board. You look at where we are currently, like in the United States, 45 to 50% of all U.S. adults are obese.
Yeah.
You look at the heart disease is still the number one risk factor for men, women, and for most racial ethnic groups.
Yep.
And osteoporosis, cardiovascular disease, and Alzheimer's are still the top for women. Mm-hmm. 1 in 9 kids, or 1 in 4 children has childhood obesity.
Yep.
In the last couple of years alone, we've spent over $300 billion on fast food. I believe that's up about from $270 million just in 2020, just since COVID. So it's well over probably the $330 billion. This country spends $4.2 to $4.3 trillion. That's trillion with a T.
Yeah.
Every year on healthcare. 80% of the FDA's budget goes to chronic disease. And if you ask me, we've gotten significantly worse, in this country, with most demographics and most racial ethnic groups. Over 700,000 people die every single year of cardiovascular disease, and that's been a number one killer for at least the last 20 years, and nobody does anything about it. I do believe things are going to really change, hopefully with, the incoming or whatever the next administration is. Different topic. But so if you look at where women stand with those things, those components, it's Alzheimer's, osteoporosis, and cardiovascular disease. Mm-hmm. And your question is about, strength training. People look at strength training. It's funny because like younger women look at strength training a little bit different than older women in some capacities.
It's starting to shift.
Yeah, starting to shift a little bit. And, because traditionally and you still get this today, and I don't want to live because I don't want to, be the Hulk from, Avengers 3, that type of thing. But if you look at what the vast majority of women do, and these could be competitors, these could be powerlifting competitors, strong women competitors, fitness, figure, wellness, like they all have one thing in common is that they all lift fairly heavy, now depending on the sport and what it may, require.
Right.
But they all focus on some of the same commonalities, and those are like fundamental basic training programs and tried and true training principles. Your squat, your hinge, your push, your pull. Some things may be a little bit more aesthetic in nature, whereas some events may be more, fast and dynamic or, more powerful, but they all rotate and revolve around basic elements, of training. And particularly like for older adults, you're looking at decreases of risk factors like across the board, right? Decreased risk of osteoporosis, decreased risk of falls and fractures, frailty, increase in strength, hypertrophy, all this other stuff. So the benefits far, far outweigh like any risk, right? Mm-hmm. It comes down to like what their current injury history is, or if they have any pre-existing conditions or like comorbidities that you have to contend with. What's their physical capability, what's their capacity, like what they can able to really handle, right? Yeah. And people think, well, I just put everybody like on trap bar deadlifts. Well, no, that's not a very good strategy, because even though like a trap bar deadlift is less technically demanding than say a barbell, traditional or like sumo, sumo's kettlebell squats, or goblet squats, something like that, where you still maintain the pattern, but it's significantly less skill, it's less physically demanding, it's less technically demanding, right? Mm-hmm. So nobody can really sit here and try and argue that strength training doesn't really have any benefit, when if you look at, like take my, parents, for example, like my mom, she's 76, she's deadlifting 150.
Yeah.
Like for reps,
right? Like
5 to 6 reps, like trap bar, no belt, no straps.
Yeah.
Right. Could she have done that like without my help? Probably, but it could have taken her like a significant longer period of time.
Right. To learn the skill set.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But particularly for older individuals, like you got to keep the skill low.
What's her quality of life like now versus?
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It really is. And people just don't understand. And I often think it's somewhat of a generational thing too, because like our parents, resistance training and performance and that stuff wasn't really around, at all growing up.
Because you look at their lifestyles, right? Yeah. Like, so your parents are about the age of my grandparents. I would say like my grandparents are 5 to 10 years older, depending, but within around your parents' age. Mm-hmm. And like I've watched, I was fortunate enough to have like 2 full sets of grandparents because of divorce. I've watched a good portion of my grandparents' lives deteriorate and quality of life deteriorate. But you also have to look like both my grandpas grew up on farms.
Yeah.
And so did my grandmas, realistically, like with the way life was when they were growing up. Mm-hmm. It was physical. They moved.
Yeah.
And we just don't have that. We don't have that really anymore.
There's still some left, but it has deteriorated just so much, right? Partly due to, lifestyle, environment, culture, all those types of changes, technology. I could certainly make an argument for technology. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. On the whole, like we just significantly move a lot less today than even when we did 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. And probably even 10 years ago. So it really, when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, like it's really not a long period of time. You go back to look at some of like original research, even like some textbooks, you can find pictures of this online, like it's all public. Mm-hmm. You look at how people looked like physically looked like from 70s, 50s, 70s, like in 80s. There was no obesity like prior to the mid 1980s. I mean, just think about this for a second. Like there was literally obesity wasn't really a thing prior to the mid 1980s. Yeah. You see people on the beaches like with, skinny shorts on and bikinis, like they're all thin, they're all skinny. Maybe they smoke, drink, who knows, whatever. Mm-hmm. But you didn't have the chronic diseases then as you did now. Like you had some of them, right? But not to the vast degree that you have now. It's insane.
I think another thing too that we can talk about is, I like that you bring up before in 1980s. It's like you look at those people. No one was like what we now deal with is skinny fat. Mm-hmm. Right? So someone who appears to be healthy just simply because they do not look fat. But if you, as both of us as fitness professionals, we work in the strength and conditioning space, like know what muscle tissue looks like, we can pick it out all the time. Someone who is still, by definition, obese because they have more fat mass than they do muscle mass, but simply because they don't look outwardly, right? Like they're not spilling out of clothes. People in society in general will classify them as like healthy or skinny.
Yeah. And that's a great point because it's the definition of healthy, it's very misguided and it's a misnomer. Yeah. Because just from a pure definition perspective, healthy is just absence of disease or disability. Yep. But it doesn't tell you anything about how much lean body mass that you have. It doesn't tell you anything about holistic health markers. It doesn't tell you anything about what your current or past blood work, looks like. Mm-hmm. It doesn't tell you anything about hormonal concentrations. It doesn't tell you anything about strength. It doesn't tell you anything about, well, can you move well and like can move often? Yeah. It doesn't tell you anything about mobility. Like there's so much that it doesn't really tell you because we've been inundated from a broken system that has profited off the customer and relies more on the profit than actually like helping people get better and reduce chronic disease, so but just like we pointed out, we were talking before the show and about we've seen such an influx of holistic health coaches that have really exploded over the last like few years, really since during and after COVID, which I think is going to be have more of a significant presence as the years go on, yeah. Right? Because it's going to really impact the traditional outlook on both health, but also like the traditional doctor, outlook, yeah. Because people just want more information. Like there's so much more information now at our fingertips than almost what we really know what to do with. There's also a lot of misinformation too. And people are often confused because they have no idea what to do, what to ask, where to go, which obviously presents another layer of, confusion with people. Mm-hmm. And I'm often, I come to the conclusion to where, to a degree, that creating a large amount of confusion is done intentionally.
Yeah.
To where you want to confuse people so much that either they give up, they stop, they don't know what to do, so they just don't do anything at all, and they just rely on, traditional components to try and get better
of how they grew up.
Yeah, for sure.
So how they were taught. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean,
or it can be we've seen it the opposite way too. We've seen it as a very predatory thing in the industry of like, yeah. I'm the only one who can fix you.
Oh yeah. It's like, you're broken. You need to be fixed. Let me help you.
Yeah.
By the way, here's $5,000 for an hour, whatever it may be.
But so we kind of, you went off and you talked about some statistics, is kind of circling back, right? Like, why is strength training for women so important? And I'll add almost a degree of complexity on that because it kind of came to mind is we do see such a prevalence of like, yes, we see obesity, like you said, like 44% now.
Yep.
But of those people, what amount of those people kind of fit into that, almost that skinny fat category, that category where it's like, hey, you're still classified as obese. And I know from my background how those people typically feel. Why is that so important for women? Why is strength training so important for them? What are you seeing and what have you seen from like your realm?
I think the argument can be made for men too. Like, why is it important for men as well.
Yeah.
And the answers are really the same. I mean, if you look at like physiological and yes, there's biological differences for sure, but on the whole, I mean, females have overall less body mass. They have less cross-sectional area than men.
Yep.
They have less like total heart size, less lung capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is significantly less. And that this is not like an opinion, right? I mean, these are physiological and biological like facts. These are like factory installed, settings, if you will. Yeah. And so the confusion part for a lot of people, a lot of trainers and coaches, and especially for women, is they will often judge other females. Like if you have an average looking female who's looking to have body recomposition, gain strength, they can move better, have decreases in disease risk, they'll often see like another female who is actually a competitor in physique, fitness, wellness, or even a bodybuilder, and say, "Oh, I don't want to look like that." Or they'll do the same thing for men. Well, I don't want to lift because I don't want to look like. Well, who are you talking to? Like who are you talking about? What person look like what? Like what are you actually supposed to look like? They don't really know what they are really supposed to look like. They just have this false image in their mind, this pretense of like these predetermined outcomes that they think are present, but like they're not, because they haven't spent really any time with discipline and putting in the effort long-term for like a true like physical transformation that gives them habits and discipline and grit and fortitude and all these fundamental habitual changes that carry over to other aspects of their life. When I first started working in the private sector, this was years ago, and I think I got this from my friend like JC Santana. He said that most people, like men and women, they don't look at like fitness and training like you and I look at it, right? And that's not a bad thing, but they use fitness and training as a vehicle to extend happiness in other areas of their life.
Yeah.
And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's just a different way of looking at it.
We've talked about it on this show. We've talked about it on the show with other guests. It is the foundation of fitness is the foundation of everything in life. You want a good marriage? Fitness. You want to be a good dad or a good mom? Fitness.
Exactly.
You want to be a good brother, son, boss, friend, or otherwise? Fitness.
Yeah, I mean, from a male perspective, and I'm sure females will say the same thing. Like, if you're a male and you go into a job interview or you walk into a restaurant or a group of friends or social gathering, and you like, if I'm jacked and fit and I see another dude who's lean and jacked and fit, like there's an automatic level of respect there.
Yep.
And I'm very confident that females will often say the same thing 100%. To their other friends as well.
Yeah.
So there's a mutual respect, a deeper level of respect across the board. But you're right. Like, want a better marriage, get fit. Want to have a higher level of mental acuity, get fit. Want to be stronger emotionally, get fit. And I can tell you a great method to do that is, or one of many methods, is to train for a competition
of some kind. It doesn't
it
doesn't have to be bodybuilding.
No.
It can literally be anything from your Spartan race, half marathon, like, and the list goes on and on and on for as far as events that you can potentially pursue, jujitsu, right? Like any of these things can be in there. Yeah.
So that's what I would say to that. But yeah, I mean, what I said, it was, there is no downside to females lifting or even males.
Yeah.
And the other question is, well, I do a bunch of cardio. Well, cardio and strength training are certainly related, but if you want a tried and true like physical transformation, the resistance training and progressive overload and lifting with fundamental movement patterns consistently for long periods of time is ultimately what's going to help you get there. Cardio certainly has its own benefits physiologically, health benefits, of course, but spending 2 hours on cardio machines, 3 or 4 days a week, I'm sorry, it's just not going to get you the body that you really want. There was
because there's a big rate of diminishing return with aerobic fitness, is there not?
There is, but the answer, like, of course, in performance nutrition, strength training, is that it depends, right? So there was a meta-analysis done in 2022 in Sports Med. It's a big, very popular like research journal. It's a review journal.
Okay.
And it was basically comparing concurrent So at the same time, resistance training and like aerobic training. And there was like 1,000 subjects in there, and there's about 43 total studies. Around 600 of those subjects, did resistance training, basic stuff, leg press, leg extension, all that type of stuff, upper body work. The rest of the subjects did only aerobic exercise, right?
Okay.
It was, I believe it was cycling and running.
Okay.
And what they found was for max strength, there was like no interference effect of combining resistance and aerobic exercise. For hypertrophy, there was no interference effect combining the two. But for explosive strength, there was. If the cardio and resistance training were done together under around like 30 minutes. Right? So in other words, like you will see drop-offs in a significant negative impact of aerobic and strength training together if they're not separated by a longer period of time. Right.
Okay.
So this could be something like, oh, let's just do like strength in the morning, maybe cardio like in the early evening, or vice versa. Or like for me, for example, I always do it on separate days.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying like, don't do any strength training or don't do cardio. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if you want to focus on explosive strength patterns, you might want to do it on a separate days. Okay?
Right. But for general population, women looking to build muscle tissue, enjoy their physique more, feel better naked, etc. From what we're getting from this meta-analysis, strength and hypertrophy are not affected when combined with aerobic fitness at all.
That's
it
correct.
Is only the power dynamic if you are in strongman powerlifting or true sports, right? Like basketball, baseball, football.
According to that meta-analysis, that's what the results that's what they found was. Now, of course, that's just one of many meta-analysis, but that was one of the most recent ones. So yeah, I mean, if you look at it from a real world perspective, like ask female competitors, fitness, physique, wellness, do they do cardio and strength in the same day? A lot of them do. Do they do it on separate days? A lot of them do. It's just really how you're really structuring your training program. So again, like that's always been a question that people have. Well, should I do weights first or like cardio first? And the answer is it really doesn't matter, but it depends on what is your ultimate goal? Like what are you trying to really achieve? I've been saying this for 10 years and I still believe it to be true today. And that is this. So many people would make much better progress if they actually had something they were training for.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, it doesn't have to be like a strength competition. Nope. It could be MMA stuff, jujitsu. It could be boxing. It could be, a Spartan race, whatever it may be. Like have something that you really want to compete and train for, because then you create a higher level purpose and meaning to your training and a level of discipline that wasn't previously there.
Yeah, you can create a high level of intrinsic motivation, right? It's external of you. There's a end date of like getting somewhere, right? And I used that strategy myself like 6 years ago. I booked a photo shoot 6 months out as if I was going to compete, and use that as an intrinsic motivator to get there. You obviously, I feel like, look a lot more at research and data and studies being published, just given, kind of how you got in the space and your background. And over the years for women, you mentioned it earlier and it popped into my head, is like, how many women break a hip and fall versus fall and break a hip? It's normally not, like, a lot of people don't know that. It's the hip actually breaks and then they fall. That's what causes the fall, because of osteoporosis and the weakness of those bone structures.
Also, too, think of it like this. With the risk of like falls and fractures, it comes back to levels of strength. But when you walk, and walking is actually somewhat of a complex endeavor, right? I mean, we do it like it's nothing.
Right.
But when you look at elderly individuals, they scoot their feet. And one of the main purposes of that is because a loss of stability. When you have shorter strides and shorter stride length or even stride frequency, you tend to scoot your feet as a defense mechanism for your body to want to be stable, right? Yeah. You don't pick your foot up all the way, or plantar flex, or extend all the way when you come up. So those are some of the probably the more minor contributing factors, but it's also one's inability to like decelerate, right? Because when you walk, like whenever you plant the foot, you have to kind of decelerate one leg in order to kind of move the other leg, for the gait pattern.
Right.
So a lot of individuals, older adults, have problems with that because they lack stability. Well, why do they lack stability? Well, because they're not strong. Because why are they not strong? Well, because they lack mobility, their ability for the muscle and joint to move around in a given degrees of freedom. All that, and why is that? Well, because they sit. I mean, think about what our current culture is like. I mean, we wake up, we out of bed after lying, we sit at the table, we eat, we go in our car, we sit, we have lunch, we sit. We go back in our car, done working, we sit in our car, we go back home, we sit and have dinner, go sit on the couch, watch your Netflix and repeat the pattern. Yeah. I mean, so should there be much of a surprise that these things are happening? And the kicker is that the vast majority of people don't realize these are problems until way later down the road when they actually manifest as problems.
Yeah.
So.
How many days do you feel like are needed for a woman to maintain bone density, maintain enough muscle mass to age gracefully well into, hopefully into their 80s?
Okay, you're looking at a non-competitor.
Yeah.
Okay, 3 to 4, easy.
Yeah.
That's it. 3 to 4 days a week, consistently done for several weeks, several months. Now, here's what I want to really emphasize. For whatever reason, and I still can't really figure this out, I think it's part of it because people's, perception is reality for a lot of people.
Yep.
But, it's for some odd reason that they think, and this is the problem that I have with all these companies, programs, like all these quote challenges, these 9-day challenges, all this other shit is, well, what happens after that period?
Yeah.
Okay. Most people don't think about that. Okay, great. Like 10 weeks. Great. Well, what happens after that? They don't put together, okay, I spent all this time, 10 weeks focusing on A, B, and C. Now that the 10 weeks is over, it becomes like, oh shit, like what do I do? Well, the answer is it's a lifestyle. You have to repeat these habits and repeat these patterns day in and day out, right? And most people think of, oh shit, like I have to do all this other stuff. Yes, but I've always told people, especially when it comes to the training and even the nutrition part, if there's 10 things, like if you're a coach or a trainer and there's like 10 things that you feel like your client needs to work on, how many are you going to pick? And they stumble for a second. And you know what I say? I say, pick 2. Okay, maybe 3.
Yep.
Now, if they're really, really solid in terms of the level of discipline, you can go 4, but 3 at the most. But for most people, start with 2.
Yep.
And you do those, have them focus on it, track them morning or afternoon at night, and do those for like a month.
Yep.
The next time you come back around to it, they can show you evidence that they've actually successfully achieved those things. And great. Now they have 2 habits. Go to the 3rd. Yep. Same thing, go with the 4th. So over time, a period of like 6 months, like to a year, you went from, oh, damn, I got to do 10 things, but then you're automatically doing those 10 things. And you don't even have to think about it because you built the patterns.
Right. You built the skill sets. Yeah. Yep. I don't know if you know this, but like, what are the stats like for women aging who doesn't strength training? What does that start to like, what do we see in like literature? What do we start to see as far as like the potential of osteoporosis, loss of bone density, muscle mass, and like how is that
from a physiological perspective? Like you look at across like the lifespan, for example.
Yeah,
peak muscle mass for males is around age 30.
Okay, it's
around the same, for females. You meaning like your body loses around, I believe it's about maybe 2 to 5% of muscle mass, like for every decade. Believe after like age 25 to age 30, right? So you go from age 30 to like age 50, you lost, a good 10% plus more of like muscle mass. That doesn't seem like it's a lot, but it's pretty massive.
Yeah.
Okay. Over a period of like 50 years, you've lost 10+% of your body mass. Okay. Yeah. And and I know you've heard people say this, and they might be like in their 60s or 70s, well, I'm the same weight now as when I was like in college. Well, that's great, but how much muscle mass have you actually lost? Right. Quite a bit.
What is the body composition?
How much body composition have you gained? Quite a bit. So you've lost lean body mass and gained body fat, on top of that. So in terms of like risk factors and stuff, I mean, physiologically, unless you're genetically maybe prone to some of these ailments or autoimmune diseases or neuromuscular diseases, typically osteoporosis doesn't really start showing up till after age 50. Definitely age 60 and 70 for sure. And it goes back to what I said. I mean, people, they lack movement. They lack heavy progressive overload resistance training. Like my mom goes every year to get a DEXA scan. She's been going for years.
Okay.
Her bone mineral density it's off the chart.
Yep.
Like compared to the same people, like her counterparts or other female cohorts.
Mm-hmm.
And she's off the chart. And the reason is because she's been doing heavier progressive resistance training over a period of a number of years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you look at women now in their 70s, 80s, I mean, their bone mineral density is like, it's unbelievably low,
right?
Which presents a whole host of other risk factors aside from just osteoporosis or falls risk factors, et cetera, et cetera. And, if you look at even position statements from, American Heart Association, American Diabetes Association, American College of Sports Medicine, these position statements like over the years, typically for women, I believe it's, 55 and older, like age, and men too, I believe it's over 45 to like 50. But age is already like a risk factor. Like you get to age 55, like you're already at risk, like automatically, like just because of age, right? So can that go against you? Yeah, it can, right? But you can certainly offset that by adapting to a better lifestyle of, eating, performance output, resistance training, changing of lifestyle, changing of habits. Like you can really offset all those other things and still be like the same, and still be at risk because of age, but all these other things like you're not at risk for. Right. Like your blood markers are, phenomenal. Like you can lift heavier, great. You can have quite a bit of, cardiovascular like endurance and like stamina, right? So you can offset all those other risk factors just by doing these basic fundamental things and changing your lifestyle and habits.
How many days at 76, how many days a week is your mom training?
She's 3.
3.
Yeah. Sometimes
Perfect.
4, but typically 3.
Yeah. Which makes sense.
That can include like body weight things with, Pilates stuff or, resistance training, like with machines, stuff like that. And of course I tell them, things to do, not to do, how to do it, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, 3 for sure.
Okay.
Yep.
And you said, okay, so like bone density off the charts for her, comparatively speaking to her counterparts.
Mm-hmm. Other females like her age are on the same age group.
How old do you feel? And this might be kind of a catch-22 question because you're her son, but honestly, how old does your mom look?
She looks 60.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, like I'm a huge believer, muscle is the fountain of youth. Like I've met so many people.
Oh yeah.
And I know you have, especially speaking.
Mm-hmm.
How many people have you met that you're like, they look 20 years younger than what their actual age is?
Yeah. And there's a difference between like, there's physiological age, there's like biological age.
Yeah.
Right. You might be biologically 75, but physiologically you're, 60, right? Something like that. So yeah, I mean, and I've always said similar to like resistance training done over a period of number of years is really the closest thing to the fountain of youth that almost anybody could ever really get to or really achieve.
Right.
So, and it's probably, and I know individuals like Gabrielle Lyon talk about this all the time in terms of, how skeletal muscle and being strong and being fit, it is multi-dimensional benefits like across every area like of life.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, people look at it like it's a singular focus. Okay, great. Like I'm fit and I'm strong, but they don't think about things like, especially like maybe elderly, older adults. Mm-hmm. They don't think about things like getting up quickly and effortlessly like off a couch or a chair. Yep. Picking up suitcases.
Picking up their grandchildren.
Picking up their grandkids. I always find it interesting that even young girls, especially, if I had a preference, I like working with women more because they tend to listen better just by natural instinct. And if they're serious enough, they will really do what it takes to get to the level that they really want. And this could be a competitor or non-competitor. Like it doesn't matter. If they're serious enough, then they will do it. Whereas dudes, obviously have a higher level of ego and they think they know all the answers.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the reasons why I like working with females more, because they tend to be a lot more coachable.
Yeah.
And you like, I kind of got off on a tangent, but if you look at how females operate in terms of like level of coaching ability,
yep,
it's more superior to males.
For sure.
And the communication style tends to be a little bit more natural.
Yep.
Versus male to male.
Yep.
I'm just talking comparatively speaking. I mean, there's a lot of variation within coaching style, even coaching communication.
Yeah. But
just basic, fundamentally, like it's tends to be a little bit more smoother with women. They tend to be a little bit more coachable. Yeah, I mean, there's no, like, having a higher degree of skeletal muscle will help you achieve anything that you may want, like, in life, because you've already established skills and habits just from from that thing alone,
right,
that you can do with anything else.
Yeah, it can be applied anywhere else. What does the data say about, so you said, okay, ages roughly men, 25 to 30, same with women. We reach peak muscle mass, and then slowly but surely 2 to 5%, depending on the person, it's going to decrease decade over decade. Mm-hmm. But there's now data that exists that say if you are consistently training, and for women, right, 2 to 4 days per week over the course of decades, that you can not only negate that loss, but even potentially go the opposite way. That's potentially right. Still manage to gain, say, 2 to 5% muscle tissue decade over decade, mm-hmm. as we age. What is that current like literature and data look like?
It's very similar. It's that exact thing. Let me kind of give you a comparison. If you look at some of the strongest people in the world, mm-hmm. and I'm really talking about males, like the great power lifters of the world,
right?
The legendary strongman competitors, Americans, Eastern Europeans, they're all in their 40s. Yeah. Okay. Like they're not 25.
No.
Like when someone says, oh, my deadlift is like 700 or 800 pounds and they're 25 years old, I don't give a shit. They're on a bunch of drugs. I don't care if someone's on drugs, but physiologically, right? Mm-hmm. In terms of your years spent training and peak muscle mass, things don't line up. Like you can't be 25 years old and naturally deadlifting is like 700, 800 pounds. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like what we talked about before the show, like what I call like farm boy strength.
Yeah.
Like there's people that are just naturally strong because of either genetics, their environment, all that stuff. But if you look at the strongest people in the world, strongman competitors, male and even females, they're all in their late 30s to early 40s.
Right.
And the reason is because they've gained so much muscle mass, but they've continued to get stronger over time. And granted, it's a smaller amount, right?
The percentage
is just like significantly smaller percentage, but you can still able to really do it. I mean, for myself, for example, like I've put on more lean tissue over the last like year and a half or so, year wise, than I did even prior to COVID, is because I'm focusing more on higher stimulating like repetitions, the recovery, dialing in on the nutrition stuff. Mm-hmm. I'm more muscular and leaner than I was even like a year and a half or 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But I still believe that you can achieve strength even like in your 40s. So this idea of I'm as strong as I'm ever going to get, when people say, no, not really. You look at some of the strongest people, like they're in their 40s, so it can be done, but you're right. I mean, you can negate that and potentially even almost, I don't want to say completely reverse it, but you can slow it down significantly.
Yeah. 100%. What, so you said, okay, you enjoy coaching women. And I mean, at the end of the day, like realistically, that's how my company was birthed, how this podcast was really birthed long term, right? Like I've been in the industry for a decade, and slowly but surely it came to that point. It was like, okay, well, like men don't typically like to listen to other men very well. like the communication styles are different. And overall, like you said, women, when given a direction and a blueprint, generally they will follow suit and they will execute very, very well. In your years of like working with women, like how capable are women of like getting really like strong, like pound for pound versus men, and like what you've seen in your practice and coaching and stuff like that?
I think women are extremely capable.
Yeah.
More so than a lot of them think that they are.
Mm-hmm.
And they're also stronger than what they believe to be that they are.
Yeah.
Like for example, and there's of course, men too, but we're mainly talking about women. There's differences of terms of so much individual variability to how people respond to training.
Yeah.
Like for example, like women can respond very well to moderate to high reps for upper body, but they do not respond the same way with like lower body movements of the same set and rep range. Right. So for example, like, I been working with somebody for like the last like year and a half to 2 years. And she's continuing to does boxing, but the boxing coach was also having them do like a bunch of like kind of ridiculous high volume, junk volume, stuff. And she noticed over a period of maybe like 6 weeks, 6 weeks, like she was like really getting like big. Like she was a massive responder to like hypertrophy, like responded very, very well to like high volume and like, overall muscle hypertrophy. And she didn't really want that. Like she wanted to continue the boxing, but she didn't want to do, 4 sets of like 12 to 15 reps, with stuff.
And this was lower body.
This was everything. Mainly lower body, but it was upper body too.
Yeah.
And so what we did is like, we sat down and we're like, look, continue the boxing, but why don't we try to make some changes with the training program and do some of the similar exercises, but now we're doing like 3 sets of like 5 to 6 reps and really focusing on highly stimulating like repetitions. And granted, like a year or so later, like it's a significant difference. Like physically, you can see the actual difference. And so a lot of it comes down to not only what women really want in terms of how to look, and some women want like the high volume hypertrophy stuff, and and some women don't. And I'm not here to say like, well, you need this and you need that. It's all based around what they personally want to really achieve. And you have to accept that, like as a trainer, as a coach, like it's not about what you want, like it's about what they want. So we changed their training program. And now she's spending time doing similar movement patterns, squat patterns, deadlift patterns, machine-based stuff, rotational power things. And, the set and rep range is, a couple warm-up sets, 3 work sets, 5 to 6 repetitions, hard stimulating repetitions with a higher load. And she's gotten significantly stronger, like, because of it. And she still continues to box.
And she's probably seen a lot less inflammation in her legs.
Less, and that's one of the
volume gain.
Correct. And that's one of the things, advantages actually that women have comparatively with men. I mean, I mentioned earlier, they have, women have, less body mass, less muscle mass. One of the advantages that women have is that they can train at a higher workload and higher capacity, higher relative intensity compared to men. One of the reasons for that is because they have significantly less inflammation from their training. And that's mainly due to the estrogen protective effects against muscle damage. So in other words, that you can have all things being equal, aside from biological differences, you can have a male and a female do the exact same program. Let's just say all things else being equal. The workout program is the same. Females will have a significantly less inflammation and less muscle damage and soreness compared to males, because females exhibit an estrogen protective effect against muscle damage versus males. So what does that mean? It means that women can train at either a higher frequency or higher relative workload and higher level of intensity, and either achieve the same level results or more at a slightly faster rate than males, because they have the estrogen protective effects against muscle damage and inflammation.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yep. You brought it up. So kind of rolling into the next 2 questions, you brought it up is, and I think this is important because I recently got some feedback, some kind of questions of like what some people wanted covered in a topic. And I feel like you're a great person to cover this with. Is number 1 is like, you keep kind of saying squat and then you kind of go into patterns.
Okay.
What are the basic patterns that a woman should be training? and what are the movements to match those patterns?
Okay, so any type of squat pattern, right?
Okay.
Now this could be barbell, this could be other specialty bars, this could be dumbbells, this could be kettlebells, whatever squat, pattern, that there is. So that includes things like, trap bar deadlift, kettlebell goblet squats, dumbbell squats, foot wedge, front squats, that type of thing. It could be front kettlebell squats, real elevated split squats. Now, some of these variations obviously have a higher level of skill or technical skill or demand. And that's certainly can be like another conversation, but hip thrust, and variations, it could be single leg, barbell. I'm always been a fan of like people shit on Smith machine a lot, but I've always looked at it as a pretty valuable tool,
100%.
especially like for hip thrust because there's just a less setup time, mainly.
Yeah.
But nowadays, of course, you have other, machines and glute builders and booty builder machines that can do the same thing. It's also less setup time. Some type of overhead press movement. So you need a squat pattern, a deadlift pattern, some type of overhead movement. This could be dumbbells, kettlebells, a shoulder machine, single arm. You need some type of body weight, movement. This could be push-ups. You need some type of power movement. Now, this could be kettlebell swings. This could be rotational power. This could be with bands. This could be, with cable machine, apparatus. This could be with medicine balls, and some type of like, stability pattern. So you have these fundamental patterns that not only women should be doing, but men also can achieve the same thing. So you have these kind of like these 10 commandments or so of, basic fundamental movement patterns that are really the main drivers of like true transformational, change.
What should a female be looking for when it comes to training programs? Like I got this question and it was basically like, what should they be looking for in a training program? If they can't afford a coach, how would they maybe go about building their own program? And if they're not going to build their own program, but they're going to go a more affordable route with like some of these subscription-based websites where it's like $7 or $20 or $30 or whatever it is, what are they looking for to know that they're not getting like hosed and they're not going to cause more harm than good?
Good question. So what should a female be looking for program design?
Yeah.
They can either try to build themselves if they don't want to go out and pay somebody outright or whatever. It really goes back to what I just said. You need always make sure that you have some type of, it could be a bilateral movement, like double leg pattern. This could be squat. This could be a deadlift pattern, like trap bar, etc. A single leg movement. Okay. You need some type of low back or hamstring movement. Okay. You need upper back movement. Okay. This could be rows. It could be like lat pull downs. This could be most programs, depends on the style of coach and what their experience and exposure is, don't have rotational patterns in the program. And I would significantly highly recommend that you put a rotational pattern or some type of power movement in there. Now this I don't mean like, you have to do Olympic weightlifting. I'm talking about things like rotational med ball slams or cable rotational power punches, or something that works in rotation in the transverse plane. You also need a lateral or frontal plane movement. So in other words, if you have a sheet of paper and there's a bunch of exercises on here, okay, like there could be leg press, like this is like very, very basic. You got a leg press, a leg extension, and a hamstring exercise, some type of hip movement, an RDL. This could be a trap bar deadlift, whatever it may be. Where's your chest movement? Do you have a shoulder movement? Do you have an arm movement? Like you can kind of go down the list of what most traditional textbooks talk about, larger muscle groups kind of moving into smaller muscle, areas. And that's a good place to start. I wouldn't say it's a phenomenal place to start, but it's a really good starting point. Right. But the reality is that when you get into like advanced training methods, you don't really have to always start with a fun, big compound movement. Okay. But if someone that's just starting out, you want to make sure that you have these specific correct pillars in place to where you're kind of getting the biggest bang for your buck and hitting kind of the main body part areas. Like you got a quad movement, like start at the very beginning. There's a squat pattern or a hinge pattern. Okay. You have something that's a carry, okay, like a farmer's walk. You have a quad movement, a hamstring movement. Maybe it's low back, upper back, lats, arms, et cetera.
Mhm.
So if you're looking at a sheet of paper and you're trying to figure out, is this a decent program? Does it follow like a linear fashion of progressive overload? Or does it start out with things like bicycle crunches, and then it goes to tricep pushdowns, and then it goes to, I don't know,
Randomly throws in a
random
squat.
shit, burpees, and all this other stuff, right? I mean,
My favorite is seeing what you just said, and then it's RDL or a squat, like in the middle of everything, and you're like,
yeah,
but you're already tired.
right. So my advice is to look at your sheet of paper, whatever it may be. Does it have these tried and true fundamental movements at the basic level,
right,
or even, a variation of something? It doesn't have to be really complex. Does it possess these fundamental movement patterns? If so, what are they? What is the order of them? What's the frequency? What's the intensity? And then what does week 2 look like? What does week 3 look like?
Right.
Okay. That is a wonderful place and a fundamental place to start looking at basic program design.
100%.
Okay. And I will say this as like in a very advanced or maybe like an elite level individual, most people think that as you go up the ladder in terms of experiences and exposures, I'll come back around that in a minute because I have a cool thing to say about experience and exposures. As you move from like beginning, intermediate, advanced, like elite level athlete, for some odd reason, people think the more advanced and more trained that you are, then you have to do all this crazy out of the box, like crazy shit, extras, crazy stuff that you see on social.
Yeah.
And that's not the case.
No.
Now, does that mean some of that stuff like just doesn't work at all? No, some of it certainly has like some transfer and has some appeal. But if you look at like collegiate athletes, Olympic athletes, how many of those individuals stand on a BOSU ball with a chain around their neck, doing squats with dumbbells, and then they throw it off, and then doing sit-up throws with barbells thrown into the other person online to get, clicks and likes and all that stuff? Like they're not. There's a massive difference between doing something that just looks good and then doing something that actually has a true effect and transfer.
Right.
Which brings me back to the experience and exposure part. Somebody can have a lot of experience. Like somebody can have 20 years or so of experience, but their exposures are really limited. Here's an example. You may have like I'm just using this example. I'm not crapping on like, bodybuilding, but if all you know is like bodybuilding and you're not a bodybuilding coach, like you're not training elite level professional bodybuilders, right? Maybe you competed in it or whatever. If that's all you know in terms of training methods, well, that's all you're going to be able to give your clients.
Yep.
Okay. So you can have a lot of experience, but your exposures to other training methods and tactics, strategies, different variations, trying different exercises of like different ranks of skill, technicality, physical demand,
right?
Those are limited.
Yeah.
So your exposures are limited.
Yep.
But you can also have a lot of exposure and a lot of experience to now where you've opened up the door to where you can provide almost any program to anybody based on their level of capability or, history or whatever it is.
I love what you say. And I want to add one thing is like, I think you can go the opposite way.
Okay.
I think you can have a lot of exposure and not a lot of hands-on experience.
That's very true. Yes. We see that quite a bit, actually.
We do.
Yeah.
A lot of exposure, not a lot of experience of application.
Right.
So then they get really like lost in the weeds and the ability to apply it in the appropriate place. Part of this podcast, Intentional Health for Women podcast, is, my mission is to help thousands of women lead intentional lives. And I think this is a great ending question that was given to me by a mentor is, in this current season of your life, how are you living intentionally?
Is there a scale of some kind, or is it just more subjective?
More subjective. Like how are you living like intentionally? Like I'll use myself as an example. Like in this season of my life, like I've come to realize like I want to be a husband and a father. So like my life in general, like life choices, like how I choose to spend my money, how I choose to spend my free time. How do I, like, the things that I'm working towards that I know I need to develop in order to be a good husband and or father in the future. Like, those things are like dictating how I lead and live my life intentionally. So maybe that gives you more of an insight.
I think I believe that I live my life with a higher level of intention.
Yeah.
And I think for, the audience members, and this could be applied to almost anybody, there's going to be certain periods of your life to where certain areas are more intentional and certain areas are not as intentional.
Yeah.
And I don't think that somebody does it on purpose or intentionally. It's just kind of how it evolves in a sense. Like for me right now, my eating is intentional. My training is intentional.
Mm-hmm.
The competition in terms of competing for a contest is not intentional.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would I want to compete in strongman again for master's level? Yeah, I would love to, but it's not.
That doesn't fit this season.
It doesn't fit this season. Right.
Yeah.
And maybe late next year or whatever, season. So there's these different periods of seasons that everybody goes through to where there's intentional with A and B, with C and D, not as intentional. Doesn't mean it's not important. It's just like, okay, I got to focus on this first. And then I can come back around, to this. However long that gap is, it's different for everybody. Yep. But, for me, it's like I'm intentional with the eating, intentional with the training, intentional with the speaking, intentional with the, with the content. Household stuff, not as intentional. Yeah. So, and it's different for everybody depending on what their current situation is. And I can't speak for, anybody else. But yeah, I mean, there's different periods and different seasons to where things are intentional, things are not intentional. And I think you have to be very aware and have enough self-awareness to know, okay, I'm really doing very well in these areas and I can put those on autopilot and let's just focus on these other areas and get those up to speed. And what happens over time is you take the things that are on autopilot or what now is on autopilot, and you take the things that you have to work on, and now you move those up, and now they run in parallel to where these other things can now be on autopilot. So you continue to kind of move up this level of sequence, and you just become you can be with someone that nobody tries to screw with.
Yeah, absolutely. With that being said, thank you. Where can everyone find you?
You can find me online on all social platforms, Dr. J Mike, DRJ and you can sign up for our newsletter. We have a free PDF on my Instagram about how to increase and turbocharge your power output.
Right.
I'm doing a free webinar here soon about that. We're launching some really cool things coming up. So that's where you can find me. Give me a follow. And dude, it was awesome to be on here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks.